This hearing will come back to order. As I stated before we had the brief recess there, that concludes the opening statements by members of the subcommittee. Now I would like to call upon our first panel of witnesses. On our first panel, we have Robin Beaton, who is a policyholder from Waxahachie, Texas. Ms. Peggy Raddatz from LaGrange, Illinois, who is a sister of the late policyholder Otto Raddatz. And Ms. Whitney Horton, who is a policyholder from Los Angeles, California. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for coming. It's the policy of this subcommittee to take all testimony under oath. Please be advised that you have a right under the rules of the House to be advised by counsel during your testimony. Do you wish to be represented by counsel during your testimony? You're all shaking your heads no. So, okay. Then I'm going to ask you to please rise and raise your right hand to take the oath. Ms. Beaton, if you want to sit there, that's okay. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but truth, the matter pending before this committee? Let the record reflect the witnesses replied in the affirmative. They are now under oath. We will hear a 5-minute opening statement from each of you. Ms. Beaton, would you like to start first with an opening? You'd like to be last. Ms. Horton, do you mind going first? Would you pull that mic forward and turn on a green, should be a green button there, and pull that mic forward. It doesn't pick up as well as it should.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Can hear you. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to start by thanking the committee for this opportunity to testify this morning. I am very pleased that Congress has decided to take a close look at rescission so that it can understand just how damaging this practice has been to so many people across the country. When Blue Cross canceled my coverage, I had no idea what rescission meant. But now, after my life has been turned upside down for the past 4 years, I've come to understand what a despicable practice it is. Insurance companies require you to fill out an application that is deliberately confusing, and they don't do anything to make sure you understood the questions or that you supplied all the information they need to decide whether they want to insure you or not. They just accept you and accept your premium checks. It's after you see a doctor that everything changes. When your doctors file claims, the insurance company starts looking for reasons not to pay them. They dig through your medical records and compare what they find to the information you put down on the application. It's called post-claims underwriting, and in California, where I live, it's illegal. But insurers ignore the law, and when they find a discrepancy or an omission, they rescind the policy and refuse to pay any of your medical bills, even for routine treatment or treatment they previously authorized. Blue Cross's decision to rescind my insurance was devastating to my husband and me, and I consider myself one of the lucky ones. As the lead plaintiff in a class action lawsuit against Blue Cross, I represent 6,000 Californians who were all stripped of their insurance by Blue Cross. You can't imagine how horrifying some of those stories are. Blue Cross rescinded some of these people right after they'd undergone open heart surgery or were receiving chemotherapy treatment for cancer. Some of these people were left with hundreds of thousands in unpaid medical bills. One thing we all had in common, we all were left to somehow stay healthy and fend for ourselves after Blue Cross walked away from its promise to provide health insurance. I sought insurance with Blue Cross in 2005 because my parents raised me to believe that health insurance was an absolute necessity that should never be taken for granted. I work in the film industry in Los Angeles, California, where employment is generally temporary and done on a freelance basis. So for me and many others in the industry, individual coverage is a necessity. At the time I applied for coverage, I had just left a temporary staffing agency for Sony Pictures to go to work on a specific movie. When I made the move, I had to give up the stability of my group health care plan. So I immediately sought out individual health care coverage. When I applied for coverage with Blue Cross, I wanted to make sure that I did everything correctly to ensure that there would be no problems. I filled out the application to the best of my ability, even though it was long and confusing. I wrote down everything I could remember about my health history, including hypothyroidism, a condition I've had since I was 18. I even listed the contact information for my treating doctor. Then I turned my application into my insurance broker. She told me everything looked good and sent it into Blue Cross, and they quickly accepted my application. I was only 27 at the time. 2 months later, I went to my endocrinologist for a checkup. I had routine blood work performed, and the doctor's office sent the bill to Blue Cross. I received a letter back from Blue Cross shortly afterwards saying that they wanted all of my medical records from both my endocrinologist and my gynecologist. I consented, having nothing to hide. A couple of months later, in June of '05, I received a letter from Blue Cross stating they were rescinding my insurance because I didn't disclose on the application that I had taken the drug glucophage, and because of irregular menstruation. I had taken glucophage the previous year, but was no longer taking it when I filled out the application. My doctor had prescribed it, hoping that it might help me lose weight, but it did not. I stopped taking the medication when I saw that it was not working for me. In its rescission letter, Blue Cross said it would have never accepted me for coverage if it had known that I had polycystic ovaries. This letter was the first time I had ever heard about this condition. I later learned that polycystic ovaries, or PCOS as it is known, is a diagnosis of exclusion and very difficult to prove. Doctors often proceed on suspicions of a person having it without actually having proven it. This is what happened in my case. My doctor suspected I might have PCOS, wrote it down in her notes, then told me she was prescribing glucophage for weight management. I never knew what she wrote down in her notes because she never told me. After I was rescinded, I had 2 of my doctors write letters to Blue Cross telling them this, but they didn't care. They just wrote back that they were upholding their decision to rescind. After being rescinded, I showed my original application to my sister and her husband, both radiologists, to ask them what I could have possibly done wrong in filling out the application. They felt that the application was worded in such a way as to be purposely confusing and that it asked the same question in multiple ways to trip people up. I'm a college graduate and no dummy, and I still couldn't make sense of Blue Cross's tricky application. The worst part about my rescission is that I have been unable to get insurance anywhere else. I applied for individual insurance through Blue Shield, but on their application, they ask if the applicant has ever had insurance rescinded. When they learned that I had, they informed me that they would not accept me for coverage. Every insurance company asks if you've ever had health care coverage rescinded. For the rest of my life, I will never be able to get individual coverage again because of Blue Cross. As someone who works in an industry that relies on individual coverage plans, this is a really big deal. Since my rescission, I have had to take jobs that I do not want and put my career goals on hold to ensure that I can find health insurance. Fortunately, after my husband and I got married, I was able to gain coverage through his company's group health care plan. However, if he ever loses his job, or I don't have employment with a company that offers group health insurance, I might have to go without. As I mentioned before, I consider myself one of the lucky ones. I don't have large outstanding medical bills, and I am relatively healthy. In fact, I was able to pay my doctors back for the blood work and office visits that Blue Cross refused to pay. But many people who have been rescinded are far less fortunate. And as the lead plaintiff against Blue Cross, I feel an obligation to speak for them as well. What Blue Cross has done to us is wrong, and they must not be permitted to continue getting away with it. Americans desperately need health care reform. As my experience shows, owning an insurance policy does not necessarily equal access to health care. If insurance companies are not prevented from canceling or restricting coverage after patients get sick, insurance policies are not worth the paper they are printed on. Insurance companies are making record profits by collecting premiums in exchange for the promises that they make to be there when people need them. Make them keep that promise. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Horton. Ms. Raddatz, on behalf of Otto Raddatz, would you like to give your opening statement? And thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the members of the committee for all your kind words and your wonderful statements. My name is Peggy Raddatz, and I am appearing here today to testify on behalf of my brother, Otto S. Raddatz. My brother was a business owner of a restaurant that he ran with his wife, Marie. He purchased a health insurance policy from Fortis Insurance Company in August of 2003. On the application, he indicated he had kidney stones and smoked. He also listed all physicians who had treated him. Otto's health application with Fortis was accepted, and his coverage began in August of 2003. A year later, my brother found himself inexplicably losing a large amount of weight. His wife, Marie Raddatz, urged him to see a doctor. In September of 2004, my 59-year-old brother at the time was diagnosed with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's type lymphoma. The very next day, he began an intensive course of chemotherapy treatments. Due to the aggressive type of cancer Otto had, being mantle zone lymphoma, he was given 6 more rounds of chemotherapy by January of 2005. He suffered a lot during this period of time and was often unable to work. Otto was referred to a specialist in stem cell transplantation for high-dose chemotherapy. Otto began more chemotherapy for purposes of preparing him for a stem cell transplant. These treatments were long and difficult in nature. In the midst of the chemo treatments, Otto received a phone call and letter from Fortis Insurance Company stating his insurance was canceled. It was rescinded all the way back to the effective date of August 7th, 2004, which was before his diagnosis for cancer. This meant none of his cancer treatments would be covered at all. Most importantly, he would not be able to receive the stem cell transplant needed to save his life. My brother only had a very small window of time in which to have the stem cell transplant. He needed to be scheduled within the next 3 to 4 weeks, or he would not be able to have the transplant at all, and his life would be ended very shortly. My brother was told he was canceled during what they called a routine review, during which they claimed to discover a material failure to disclose, as they stated in their letter. Apparently, in 2000, his treating doctor had done a CT scan which showed a small aneurysm and some very insignificant gallstones. My brother was never told of either one of these conditions, nor was he ever treated for them, nor did he ever report any symptoms for them either. After months of preparation, the stem cell transplant could not be scheduled. My brother's hope for being a cancer survivor was dashed. His prognosis was only a matter of months without the procedure. By this time, he could no longer work and ultimately had to sell his restaurant because of it.
Wait a minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I called the hospital to see if I could schedule the stem cell transplant for him because he was in such a weakened state, both physically and emotionally, I was callously told, unless your brother brings in cash and a bundle of it, he's not going to get the procedure without insurance. My brother was accused by Fortis Insurance Company of falsely stating his health insurance history, despite the fact that he had no knowledge of ever having any gallstones or aneurysms. Luckily, I'm an attorney, and I was able to aggressively become involved in solving this life-threatening situation. I got on the phone and literally made dozens of phone calls for day after day after day. I put my personal work aside and worked on this literally round the clock, calling people. I finally was told to contact the Attorney General's office and received immediate and daily assistance from the Illinois Attorney General's office and from Dr. Babs Waldman, the medical director of their health bureau. I cannot thank them enough for their daily assistance and support of myself and my brother through this difficult time. During their investigation, they located the doctor who ordered the CT scan. He was not only retired, he was on a fishing trip at the time. And through their unbelievable resolve, they were able to get a hold of him on the fishing trip. And he did recall, he had no recollection whatsoever. He recalled my brother and his treatment of my brother, but he had no recollection of ever disclosing the information to my brother or treating him for gallstones or for a small aneurysm. After 2 appeals by the Illinois Attorney General's office, Fortis Insurance Company finally overturned their original decision to rescind my brother's coverage, and he was reinstated without lapse. This is after weeks of constant phone calls between myself and the Attorney General's office, and we were literally scrambling hour by hour to get this accomplished so that my brother wouldn't lose his 3 to 4 week window of opportunity that he had prepared for and lose his opportunity to have the procedure. What the Fortis Insurance Company did was unethical. To deny a dying person necessary medical treatment based upon medical conditions a patient never had knowledge of, never complained about, or never been treated for is cruel. It is the hope of our family that this information will benefit other patients who are in need of life-saving medical treatments and who do not have the knowledge or means necessary to fight against the health insurance companies. It is further our desire to expose these practices of Fortis Insurance Company so that others do not have to suffer as victims as my brother did. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much, members of the committee, for all your efforts.
Thank you. Ms. Beaton, would you like to give your opening statement now? Pull that up, take your time, and
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm very honored to be here to share my story. My name is Robin Beaton. I'm 59 years old. I was a registered nurse for 30 years. I had insurance. I was in good health. I retired from nursing, started my own small business, obtained a personal individual policy from Blue Cross and Blue Shield in December 2007. In May 2008, I went to a dermatologist for acne, pimples. A word was written down on my chart, which was considered to mean precancerous. In June 2008, I was diagnosed with invasive HER2 genetic breast cancer, a very aggressive form of this cancer. I needed a double mastectomy immediately. Blue Cross and Blue Shield pre-certified me for my surgery and for a hospital stay. The Friday before I was to have my double mastectomy, Blue Cross and Blue Shield called me by telephone and told me that my chart was red flagged. And what does that mean? They said that due to the dermatologist's report, and that was what red flagged my chart in the beginning, that I would not be able to have my surgery on Monday. And they launched a 5-year medical investigation into my medical history for the last 5 years. I had to give them...
put it back on. You take your finger off once. There you go.
I had to give them every pharmacy, every doctor, every hospital, and they threatened me that if I left anything out, that it would be really bad. So I truly tried everything in the world I could to list every single doctor everywhere I'd ever been. I immediately got in touch with a dermatologist. He immediately called Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and he begged them. He said, "This is a misunderstanding." He said, "This is not precancerous." He said, "All she has is acne, pimples." He said, "Please don't hold up her cancer surgery for this." He begged them. He was the nicest man. Anyway, I was frantic. I did not know what to do. I didn't know how to pay for my surgery. The hospital wanted a $30,000 deposit, and I was by myself. I didn't have that kind of money. I turned to the only person that I had to turn to, and that was Joe Barton, my congressman, Joe Barton. Next day, I got a letter canceling me, canceling my insurance, rescinding it to the first day that they had covered me. Can you imagine having to walk around with cancer growing in your body with no insurance. It's the most terrible thing in the world to not have anybody to turn to, not have anywhere to go. So just can't even say how bad it was. The sad thing is Blue Cross and Blue Shield took my high premiums the very first time I ever had a claim, the very first time, and was suspected of cancer. They took action against me, searching high and low. They turned over every single thing they could in my medical history to pull out anything that would cause any suspicion on me, so they didn't have to pay for my cancer. A nurse who attends my church works full-time for Blue Cross and Blue Shield. She looks through medical records searching for reasons to cancel people. She came to me and she said, I feel so bad. She said, I just can't even tell you how sorry I am this has happened to you. Blue Cross and Blue Shield has control over life and over death. People have to be able to count on what they have paid for, count on having insurance. Blue Cross and Blue Shield will do anything to get out of paying for cancer, anything. Sad fact is anyone with a catastrophic illness who is not a part of a group, who has an individual policy, stands a really high chance of getting canceled, left out in the cold with no insurance. I go to a cancer support group every week. 4 girls in my cancer support group have had their insurance canceled. And 2 of those girls have had to declare bankruptcy because of cancer. It is very difficult for me to speak out. My insurance could be canceled again. I live in fear every day of my insurance company. I looked everywhere for help. No one found anything to help me until Joe Barton and Krista Townsend. After working for a really, really long time, every day they worked hard. I had given up hope. I didn't have any hope left. And they never gave up hope. They did everything they could to help me. And they got my insurance reinstated. After being diagnosed in June 2008 with aggressive breast cancer, I was placed back on a list to get a mastectomy, which I finally got to have my cancer surgery October 2nd, 2008. My tumor grew from 2 to 3 centimeters all the way to 7. I had to have all my lymph nodes removed in my arm, everything. Delaying cancer treatment, it only worsens the condition, costing more to treat, and treatment is much more intensive. Also, the outcome is not as good. I go to chemotherapy every 3 weeks, and I'll have to be going for the next year. Cancer is expensive, and no one wants to pay for cancer. I pray no one has to go through the sheer agony that I have had to endure for 1 year. I did not deserve to have my insurance canceled. Blue Cross and Blue Shield set out to get rid of me. They searched high and low until they found enough to cancel me, and they did. I owe my life to Joe Barton. I pray that you will listen to my story and help people like me who are powerless against the big insurance companies. And today, when I met Mr. Barton, that was the very first time I ever met him. He helped me, not even knowing me, just because he just is a good man. He just helped me. But I went everywhere. I went to the county hospital. I went everywhere looking for help. And you just get on waiting list, and when you get on waiting list, your cancer grows. So I just want to thank y'all for listening to me, and just please do something about it, because I couldn't even tell you the people I know that have been through this. It's a horrible thing to go through. Thank y'all so much.
Thanks, Ms. Beaton. You may want to turn off your mic for now.